Now, I would like to introduce to you your president of London Center. He is a dear, dear friend of each and every one of you, and you're here in support of the center, but he is, to me, a brother. He and his wife, Vicky, and my wife, Elise, and our dear, dear friends have become family. And we spend an awful lot of time together. The man has written 29 books, or co-wrote it. He's working, and the last time I told him, 29 books, Herb? He said, I'm working on my 30th. He's just finishing up his 30th book. So he's a professor. He's run for office, governor, mayor. He's all around one of the best friends you could ever have. I give you Herb London.
Thank you very much. This is a great honor. There are lots of things that I have to say, and of course, as is often the case at dinners of this kind, people have a microphone and they often talk too long. Let me assure you, there are some lies in the 21st century that you're familiar with. I'm from the government. I'm here to help you. Your check is in the mail. I love you as much tomorrow as I do tonight. I did not have sex with that woman. If you like your health plan, you can keep it. And that payment to Iran wasn't a ransom payment. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor, but let me point out some of the people who made this possible. Of course, Ladima, who I've worked with for a long time, has made this event possible. I'd like to thank her publicly. And let me also point out that Tony LaBianco has made more than 100 films. One of them is very difficult for me to watch. In The French Connection, Tony has a very important role to play in that film. But at the end, Tony gets killed. Every time I see that film, I say, no, please don't shoot him. Arrest him, but don't shoot him. Unfortunately, my wishes never come true. Let me point out, my wife is here. She's been mentioned. Vicki London, my 3 daughters are here. Stacy, Nancy, Jacqueline. Thank you for being here. There are a few other people in this audience I must mention. Bob Astorino, the next governor of New York. Bob McEwen, who has already been mentioned. Bob is a congressman from Ohio, a great, great friend. Greg Thornberry, who did our benediction so brilliantly. Greg is the president of King's College. And then there are 2 people who have the strongest shoulders in America. That's Midge Decter and Norman Podhoretz. They are recipients of our award. But the reason why I say the strongest shoulders is that almost everyone in this room who has been interested in cultural analysis has stood on the shoulders of Midge Decter and Norman Podhoretz. If you wanted to get a view of the culture over the last 5 decades, those are the people who provided the guidance. Let me thank them for being here tonight, and let me remind you, they are recipients of our award. I also wanted to point out my friend Bob Terrell is here tonight, the president of the American Spectator. Betsy McCoy, former lieutenant governor of New York. Al Kingen, who is our ambassador to the European Union and who is also the secretary for the Ronald Reagan cabinet. Larry Moen, the president of the Manhattan Institute. Peter Wood, the president of the National Association of Scholars. Phil Rosenthal, who is going to be our next congressman from New York. Mike Riley, who is running for mayor of New York City. And Michael Morgan and American Pulse for doing the recording of this event. Let me mention a couple of our Board of Trustees members who are with us tonight. Ken Abramowitz, Ruth King, Eric Klein, Amir Sternhill, John Wallstetter, Carolyn Parlato. Thank you for being here. Now a few remarks, and I will try to be brief. I've often been asked to make a few remarks at these events, and I feel obliged to do so tonight, particularly after 9/11. On this date, September 12th, more than 200 years ago, President John Adams said the following. He said this in Braintree, Massachusetts, at a speech. He said, "The preservation of liberty depends upon the intellectual and moral character of the people. As long as knowledge and virtue are diffused generally among the body of a nation, it is impossible they should be enslaved." Now, I take those words very seriously, and I try very hard to fight against the dark clouds that hang over this country. But there are dark clouds, and it's important to mention them. We have seen a debasement in American culture. It's not a new thing. It goes back to the sophists, but we see it in our midst. I saw it with Walter Duranty and the way in which he supported the Stalinist regime and won the Pulitzer Prize for it in 1932. In fact, when I was walking through the corridors of the New York Times, his portrait still hangs there, along with Herbert Matthews, who you may remember talked about that poet from the hills who was going to liberate Cuba, named Fidel Castro. And so this isn't new. Now we have Black Lives Matter, which is based on a falsehood. No one ever said, hands up, don't shoot. Never happened. Didn't happen in the case. The grand jury could find no evidence of it. And yet a movement has started to support this view. Ben Rhodes, who is the National Security Advisor to President Obama, has said, I pulled the wool over the eyes of the journalistic community by convincing them there are moderates in Iran. And so the Iran deal, in large part, was a fiction, a fantasy of Ben Rhodes's. So it is not unusual to find ourselves in the midst of lies becoming truth. Chairman Mao once said, as did Goebbels, you repeat a lie often enough and it becomes the truth. We have people like Kendrick Lamar, who's a rap artist, quote unquote, a rap artist, who talks about killing a cop, and he's invited to the president's 55th birthday party. And so, is there rancor in America? Of course there is. We are reaching the end of objectivity. It's a little like what, I guess it was Nietzsche who made the comment, there are no facts, there are only interpretations. We're living in an age where people believe you can say anything you want and the facts don't count. There are no facts any longer. In fact, there was a group of social issues members at NYU, and I was there, and they came to my office one day and they said, Herb, we'd like you to join the editorial board, but we're relativists. We don't believe there is any truth. As they were leaving my 8th floor office on University Place, I said, the elevators aren't working today, leave from the windows. If there are no facts, let's test the laws of gravity. Unfortunately, they didn't take me up on that. We live in an economy that has been stagnant for a considerable period. We have a $20 trillion debt in the United States. If we had reasonable interest rates in the United States today, it would take the entire defense budget of $600 billion to pay the financing on that debt. We have a labor participation rate that is roughly the same as 1934, the height of the Great Depression. Books written by friends of mine, wonderful books like Coming Apart and Fractured Nation, tell a story of America in trouble. And there is no question that there is trouble. In fact, in looking at this kind of depraved scene, I'm reminded of what Jesus saw roughly 2,000 years ago. And in John, it is said, Jesus looked at the scene and he wept. Well, there are many in our midst who weep. We weep because we remember an America that was a little different. But I am not here as a Cassandra. In fact, there's a lot about America that I love, and I want to talk about that. There's a Cassandra brother of mine here this evening, DeRoy Murdoch. We often get together and talk about America being in trouble. But I want to talk about something else tonight, and that is a group in America that gives me hope. A group in America that challenges despair. A group in America that is an inspiration for me every single day. I saw a TV program in which young people were being given prosthetic devices at Walter Reed Hospital. And they were asked the question, is there any lament about the position that you were in and about fighting for this country? And every single one, and they weren't cherry-picked, they said the same thing. If we had to do it all over again, we would, even if it meant losing another limb. These are Americans. These are our people. They came from our culture. They came from the society that we have created. We can't forget that. And then there are those young men, just a handful, fighting hundreds of people in a quote-unquote spontaneous battle in Benghazi, where they were trying to protect their colleagues who were in the compound at the embassy and in the CIA compound. And these young men fought to the very, very last moment. 4 of them lost their lives, but they wanted to save their colleagues. They were told, stand down. But they're American warriors. They didn't stand down. American warriors don't stand down. And then I want to tell you about an experience that I had a couple of years ago. I was asked to escort the Russian delegation, military delegation at Quantico, where in fact there was this show of military assets and that kind of pyrotechnics that the Marines go through. It was spectacular. But after a while, the Russian delegation became somewhat bored, and they said, can we walk around Quantico? I said, fine, let's do it. So we walk around Quantico, and the head of the delegation said to me, is it okay if I chat with one of these Marines? Well, we walk up to an Asian American woman, and he says to her, tell me a little bit about yourself. And she said, well, I graduated from the University of Arizona. I joined the Marine Corps. And she said, I'm proud to be a Marine. He said, well, do you think you could stand up to the Russians? She looked at him, and honestly, this is what she said. She said, if you're stupid enough to pick a fight with the Marine Corps, we're going to kick your ass. Excuse the language. Now, of course, at that moment, I wanted to adopt this young woman. But we walked around Quantico and walked up to another fellow, and he said, well, I went to the University of California. I studied physics, and I'm happy to be in the Marine Corps. He said, well, what about continuing with your scientific study? He said, well, I'm going to do that through the Marine Corps. But I'm proud to be a Marine, and I believe in defending this country. Now, the head of the Russian delegation looked at me at that moment, and he said, can I talk to you? I said, yes, sir. What is that about? He said, well, we know a lot about Potemkin villages in Russia. I know you set this up. I said, set this up? I didn't even know we'd walk around Quantico. I said, how could I set this up? I had no idea. He could not believe that this is the American fighting force. And let me tell you, it is. The young men and women fighting for the United States today are exemplary, truly exemplary. One of the great mistakes that we make, and that I often make, and that is very important to understand, never underestimate the resilience of Americans. Never underestimate those people defending our country. Our chattering classes often overlook this condition. But it seems to me that mistake is a very significant one. If America can produce the kind of warriors and soldiers that defend us, there is still a lot of strength in this nation. If we can produce a national quest of the kind that we have, that too is something about which we should be very proud. Solzhenitsyn, speaking metaphorically, once said the following: if the world were covered in cement, at some point there'd be a crack. And from this crack would be a seedling. And from that seedling would be a plant. And from that plant would be a tree. And that would be the tree of liberty. And Solzhenitsyn didn't say this, but I will, because standing next to that tree are members of the American fighting force. They are protecting that tree of liberty. And I say, God bless that liberty. God bless our fighting men. God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Please. Thank you. Look, we're going to try to conduct this meeting with military precision. So we're going to proceed. And I have a great honor tonight. It was, of course, an honor having Tony LaBianco introduce me, because I so admire his work, admire him as an actor, and admire him as a man. And now I have the pleasure of introducing a friend, a truly extraordinary politician, and someone that I've admired for years. Our friendship goes back almost 40 years. Of course, I'm only 45, but this man is really, really unusual. I met him when he was advisor to Ronald Reagan. I remember when he was head of OMB for George Bush. And when Bush, in fact, described him as the blade, because every time there was excessive spending, there was Mitch Daniels cutting that budget. I remember Mitch when he was head of strategic affairs at Lilly and president of the Hudson Institute. I remember Mitch as someone who was always there when it made a difference, and then finally has the opportunity to run the state of Indiana. He balanced the budget in the state of Indiana with the most imaginative programs, including the privatization of the highways. And then he comes to Purdue University, where in fact in an age of trigger warnings and microaggressions and all of the silliness we have in the academy today, there is Mitch standing up to the zeitgeist and saying, you know what? There's a traditional education that makes sense, and at Purdue University we're going to have it. A person I greatly admire, and someone who I think is a truly great American, Mitch Daniels.
For hardly the first time, I'm wondering exactly what the selection criteria were for tonight. I look at past honorees, Decter, Podoritz, Rumsfeld, so many others, and think there must have been other selections that could have been made. Not the first time I've had this experience, and each time I'm reminded of a sports account I read some time ago. The University of New Mexico introduced their then new basketball coach, a guy named Dave Bliss, and at the press conference, he's seated next to his wife, and some impertinent sports writer says to her, listen, everyone out here knows that New Mexico really wanted Indiana coach Bobby Knight for this job. Does it bother you knowing that your husband was not the first choice? She said, no, he wasn't my first choice either. So Herb, I don't know who your first choice was tonight, but I'm glad to stand in for reasons I want to talk about for a minute. Any cause with which you are associated, any award that bears your name, very, very special and memorable to anyone who knows you, who is lucky enough to be so favored. It was really sort of a role reversal. I really wanted to come here tonight to honor Herb, as I hope many of you do. I have been his student literally for 30 years at least. I first met him in our respective roles at the Hudson Institute a long time ago. That's where he and others there taught me how to think about the future, how never to doubt the American future in particular, how to recognize that those technologies that threaten the status quo also open unbelievable new possibilities, and that those who only see the downside have been proven wrong over and over and over again. He helped me learn how to think about education policy, science and technology, foreign policy, and even higher education, which, to my astonishment, I now find myself a part of. It's an interesting place to be these days. We're making a lot of progress at Purdue, but it's not always easy. I've been telling my new colleagues now and then, it's the one job my neuroscientist friends at Lilly one joke I think they ever knew, but I like it. He goes, how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is just one, but the bulb has to really want to change. What I want to say about her, in very sharp contrast to the lives I've led, I guess. It's easy to be an advocate of freedom in a place like Indiana, relatively so. And there's a basic affection for this country. There's an intuitive grasp of the principles of self-government. How much tougher, at least it seems to somebody from the provinces, how much tougher here, where Herb London has forthrightly and resolutely carried the banner of freedom now for all these decades of great scholarship and occasionally personal risk and advocacy. You know, he was publishing his Samizdat here in New York when only a brave few, I suppose, were willing to stand up with him. And so I just want to say that's the sort of courage and resilience freedom most needs. And Herb, thank you very much for all you've done and for setting that very special example that some of us have tried in our own tame ways to follow. Thank you so much. Tonight represents an inversion for me in one other respect, too. Usually, I'm very accustomed to people coming out to where I live from one of the coasts and saying, boy, this is refreshing. A place where people love America unreservedly, where people still understand and want to practice self-governance at its best. They don't always find that back where they come from. Tonight, honestly, because I have some of the same concerns and apprehensions Herb just talked about, I'm here for a little transfusion. I'm here for a little recharging of my optimism, and I'm getting it visiting with each of you and realizing that here, even here, one could say, there are such talented and determined friends of the liberties that we cherish. You know, in 2011, I guess I wrote a book. I'm 26 books behind Herb and probably not going to catch him. But I wrote a book, and the basic premise, familiar to everybody here, but not to all our fellow citizens, was that, look, government by the people and of the people is not the natural state of affairs. History is the history mainly of tyrants and despots and autocrats and military rulers, and that freedom, when it flowers, is a very fragile plant, and more often dies of its own hand than of external tyranny. And yet the thought of the book was to be resolutely optimistic in the Hudson Institute tradition, that if we were to address our fellow citizens as adults, as people capable of self-governance, we could have the kind of conversations we need to defer immediate gratification and to make sensible long-term decisions to defend this country as it must be and make the necessary trade-offs. And I said in the book, we must, if we would simply begin to speak to Americans as creatures of dignity and not objects of therapy, that they would respond. I still believe that. But I will say the intervening years have been a little hard on that theory. I've gone a little bit wobbly. We've had close to 8 years now of an administration that began with what at the term I called shock and awe statism, moved on into government basically by executive diktat, the kind that's much more familiar in banana republics than it has ever been in our country. They've not been stopped either by the institutions of government, the judiciary, for instance, or by an aroused people. And that's a little bit troublesome. We come to an election in which one of our two great parties is unable, or at least its leadership has been unable, to distinguish its principles from those of socialism when asked that question on national television. And in which the other great party is led, at least temporarily, by a spokesman who must be motivated by some principle, but I'm not able to discern it. Whatever it is, it doesn't appear to be individual liberty and the freedoms that, as we've understood them. And both sides, exuding a contempt and a disdain for the American people that I don't think is warranted, and which I'm sure is a very bad operating principle. If once again we would summon the American people to the important and overdue work that is to be done to defend this country and to assure the long-term prosperity on which support of self-governance, I believe, more than anything else depends. So it hasn't been the best patch to go through. I've always believed, and I think I probably learned this from Herb, that if we are going to expect the best of the American people, then we must assume the best about them and speak to them with empathy and with an understanding that too many of our leaders, whether political or intellectual, seem to have lost track of. You know, Charles Murray, the indispensable Charles Murray, wrote that it is not a problem if college professors and CEOs cannot identify with the problems of truck drivers, I would say that incorrectly. If truck drivers cannot identify with their problems, it is a problem. If CEOs and movie producers and college professors cannot identify with the problems of truck drivers, Herb London is a genuine intellectual, and he has been at times a political figure in his own right. But he has never lost sight of the average, of the ordinary people, the people who make it should be our uppermost concern. And that their point of view deserved our respect and primacy in our thoughts. He has always, I believe, understood the need for us to speak a language of, I would say, aspirational unity, which condemns no one, segregates no one, dismisses no one, but rather invites everyone, or at least the majority necessary to big changes, to join once again in common projects that are in the interest of our nation and our children. So a dose of Herb London in this crowd, just what I needed, just what the doctor ordered. I'm so grateful for that chance to be here. You know, because Herb talked about what he did, I'm going to take this extra minute to tell you a story that you probably read. But on 9/11, when a few of us were told, run, don't walk, leave the White House, get to an outside point of possible safety, 2 F-16s took off from Andrews. And that's all they had. One of them was flown by the commander of the squadron, the other by a young woman. And they were ordered to intercept United Flight 93, the one that finally crashed in Pennsylvania. But at that point, everyone understood what was going on, and it was understood there was one more plane out there. They had no ammunition. The planes had not been prepared. There was dummy ammunition because they'd been practicing. Therefore, the mission was to crash their planes into Flight 93, but the brave people on board took care of that before they got there. That young woman's a Purdue University graduate. We'll be honoring her in the year ahead, as we honor everyone who serves this country through our school. I don't miss an ROTC graduation. At our commencements, there are red, white, and blue honor cords for those who have served in the military, and it always brings a standing ovation when I tell our students and alumni what those signify. And so each of us in our own way has to try to pursue the great mission which the London Center obviously does so much to promote in this country, in which I am utterly confident, despite recent difficulties, will still prevail. Ronald Reagan, with his actor's memory, don't ever let anyone tell you he didn't have a powerful memory. It was unbelievable in its day. Used to recite, I heard this more than once, a last scene from the play Ben Franklin in Paris. He could do it from memory, but I wrote it down because I couldn't. And Ben Franklin is ruminating to himself, what would it be like if 200 years after his death, he could come back to his own Pennsylvania and meet the Americans of that time? And the scene goes, he says, I wonder how I should find them then. Will they love liberty, being given it outright in the crib for nothing? And will they know that if you are not free, you are, sir, lost without hope? And will they reap this harvest of ideas, be willing to strive to preserve them as we so willingly strove to plant them? All my life, I have known in my bones that the answer to Ben's questions was yes, of course. And despite some recent misgivings, on a night like tonight, in a crowd like this, I know and believe it still. thank you for this invitation and for an honor I will always cherish.
Good evening. What a great honor it is to speak with you all today. I was planning to be there with you in person, but we have an important hearing in Washington tonight about some of the newly released documents found on Hillary Clinton's private email server. I've been deeply involved in investigating the Clinton email server and other scandals over the past few years, so I felt like I needed to be in Washington tonight to question some of the witnesses. Speaking of these scandals, the Clinton Foundation, the email server, Benghazi, as bad as they are, I think they speak to more than just the behavior of one individual. These scandals underscore the importance for leaders to be open, honest, and straightforward with the American people. We learned through our work on the Select Committee that the Benghazi cover-up was all about politics. Libya was Hillary Clinton's baby. She and her team wanted Libya to be the shining example of how she could shape foreign policy in the Middle East without the heavy involvement of the American military. And they went to great lengths to convince themselves and the American people that their Benghazi strategy was working, even if it meant ignoring the facts or hiding the truth. They flat out ignored hundreds of security incidents and requests for more American boots on the ground in Benghazi in the months leading up to the 9/11 attack. And during the attack, they failed to launch a single military asset. Not a single man, not a single plane, to help protect American lives. But what they did launch, before the attack ended, was the political spin. The statement they released at 10:08 p.m., while Tyrone Woods was still fighting for his life on the roof of the annex, said the Benghazi attack spontaneously evolved from a protest about a video. We now know that statement was false, and we know they knew it was false. But they knew that politically they couldn't afford having our ambassador killed by a terrorist attack on their watch just 56 days before an election. So they continued to use the false video narrative with the American public, while privately admitting behind the scenes that it was indeed a planned terrorist attack. Though our investigation was thwarted by the deliberate destruction of emails on the private Clinton server, we know a few key facts. First, we know that Benghazi was a failure of honesty and integrity. The American people are smart enough and tough enough to handle the truth, but to hear Secretary Clinton tell the families of the Benghazi victims an outright lie in order to protect herself politically will not soon be forgotten. But it was also a failure of leadership. It was a failure to recognize a simple fact, that the world is a safer and better place when America leads. The world is safer when America leads economically, and the world is safer when America leads militarily and diplomatically. I've had the privilege of traveling to Israel several times. What a great place. I hope all of you have the chance to visit as well. One recent conversation I had in Israel stuck with me. When asking, what is the biggest thing the United States can do to help Israel? The gentleman in our conversation responded, stay strong. When you are strong, we are strong. When you lead, we are safer. That stuck with me, not only because of what I just mentioned about America leading, but also because of the unique role the American military has played in human history. In many countries around the world, the military is viewed as an oppressor. In some places, when you hear that the army is coming, you don't come out to wave and cheer, you hide. But the American military stands and always has stood for freedom. Freedom for the earliest Americans from a British monarchy that taxed them without proper representation. Freedom from a tyrannical German dictator who oppressed and killed millions of innocent people. And freedom for millions more across the world. I greatly appreciate being among the group to be recognized today by the London Center for Policy Research. You recognize American exceptionalism and the importance of American leadership in the world. To tackle the challenges facing our country and our culture today, we need a generation of honest and strong leaders who believe the same. Thank you again for this great honor. I wish everyone a great rest of your evening.
Wow, you don't know how happy I am to be here. I was up straightening up my tie, getting her come, and I said to my wife, Lynn, I said, honey, can you believe when we came out of the Army with $800 of accumulated leave pay in this beat-up old Volkswagen, that someday, did you believe in your wildest dreams we'd be in front of such a prestigious audience with all these incredible people, a great room? She said, honey, you're not in my wildest dreams. Now, she is quite the woman. I'm here today because of her. Because of this woman, I stand before you because there's plenty
Plenty of times in the last 50 years she could have justified and taken me out. And I'm glad she didn't. My wife of 54 years, honey, stand up and say hello to everybody. Now, you're all wondering, how did we manage to go to 54 years? Because we skirted divorce plenty of times. We burned out counselors like crazy, and the Lord did make the difference. But we now have a little secret for you younger couples. You've got to keep romance in relationship. Got to keep romance in relationship. So twice a week without fail, Lynn and I go out for quiet candlelight dinner, soft music, dancing. I go on Tuesday, she goes on Friday. I've thought of the different topics I'd like to talk about. One is the arming of the Kurds, which everybody agrees should be done, but President Obama blocks it. They tell us, we're not asking for F-16s, but we can't execute this war with AK-47s. Just give us a few heavy machine guns, give us a field hospital, give us gas masks. I got to Camp Black Tiger, the Peshmerga camp on the ISIS front lines about a year ago, and the vice commander said, we're moving ISIS out of an area. We don't have the technology to defuse the booby traps. They're losing people that. And the other thought I could talk about is the resuscitation of the Judeo-Christian value system. I think it's so exciting to see how many of our presidential candidates openly acknowledge their faith in Jesus Christ. Mike Huckabee, Rick Santorum, Rick Perry, Scott Walker, Bobby Jindal, and probably some others. And the whole core of our country, if we could reignite those values, always consider other people more important than yourself. Philippians 4:8, whatever is good, whatever is true, whatever is right, whatever is deserving of praise, whatever is honorable, dwell on these things. God's exhortation for us to be positive thinkers. The things that we could restore. I did get a chuckle one time. I was talking to 150 Tea Party leaders, and I said, one of these concepts is Galatians 5:22. The fruit of the Spirit is peace, patience, kindness, joy, self-control. Against these there is no law. So I started thinking self-control. It suddenly dawned on me, no longer can I say to Lynn, you made me angry. Because then she's in control. So I said to this group, look, nobody in this room could possibly say anything to make me angry or offend me because I've decided not to be offended. The guy in the back says, you're a liberal. I said, now that offends me. So the third topic I finally decided to talk about. I'm not going to talk about those two. And that is we Trumpsters, and I'm another deplorable. When I was, as you know, a Santorum backer in 2012 and this time, and when he dropped out, I decided I sent a $2,700 check to every one of the other 16 candidates so that I could maybe form a conciliatory function of trying to bring people together. And then when Ted Cruz and Kasich finally succumbed, I'm on the Trump train. And I grew up in northern Wisconsin on a Palomino, and I had a paint. And I hoarded 140 steers for summers and summers in my teenage years and moved to Wyoming. So that Western ethic is embedded in the very fiber of who I am. In the code of the West, there's one thing that I think we want to leave with, and that is you ride for the brand. And I want to ride for that brand, not Trump brand, Republican brand, but we need to ride for the American brand. So now, we Republicans speak to the brain and the intellect. The Democrats have learned to speak to the heart and the emotion. And we have to migrate to that. So instead of saying, let's defend the Second Amendment, let's defend the right to bear arms, let's change that terminology and say, let's, quote, preserve the right to protect our lives and lives of our family. That has a different emotional content that more people can relate to. And then add to that, 30% of gun purchasers are women. And then add to that, Hillary Clinton has had armed guards since 1983. So what does she care about whether or not the women who have to walk through these neighborhoods have guns or not? So we have to use a smarter messaging in terms of health care. We allow the Democrats, their left, to use the terminology public option, single-payer system, expansion of Medicaid. Those sound like reasonable things we could debate. Why don't we frame the debate and say, wait a minute, you're going to take the private sector, 50% of our healthcare system, and migrate it to the government system, which is represented by three entities. The Veterans Administration. What kind of access do you have represented by the Phoenix Veterans Administration? Secondly, the military. General Flynn, you can say, how much choice do you have in the military to choose your doctor? And 3, how many 747 aircraft come from Saudi Arabia, land on the third entity the government takes care of, the Indian health system? How many land on reservations for a heart valve? They don't show up. So we have the opportunity to frame these things in a lot different way to sell the American people on how we have a better system, better approach. And we have to steal the terminology and the vernacular and not allow the left to determine all these words that we have. So I hope each of you will think about how do you phrase the different things that we are for. And I want to encourage you, everyone today, when you walk out of this room, it's time for us to stop bashing Obama. It doesn't make, we're not running against Obama. We're running against Hillary Clinton. I got an email the other day that said how terrible it was that Michelle Obama had this huge, huge repertoire of staff and all the money she spends on hairdo. What difference does that make? And that's a whole waste of time of the social media that we could be harnessing. The media is not on our side. We know that. Even Fox News goes off the reservation. So Cicero said, criticize by creating. Criticize by creating. So we have the opportunity to create a counterforce which was laid right in our laps, social media. And Trump is the first guy to ever use this. How many Republican presidential candidates ever tweeted, whatever they're doing? And this Facebook, most of us, I don't even use Facebook very much. So we've got to harness this technology which is available to us to go around the media and to tell what the truth is. So we have an opportunity to bring our country back to a great degree of civility. We have never had such a diminution of civility in the last 10, 15 years. It's tragic. So I started something called Left, Right, Forward March. Together we'll get there. The mission statement is uniting Americans of opposing political views to efforts they both embrace. On the website, you can look and see Sheila Jackson Lee, one of the more liberal left-wing congresswomen from Houston, on the same podium promoting school choice with Ted Cruz. Everyone knows Laura Ingraham is a conservative talk show host. Most people do not realize that she has 3 adopted children. She is paired with a former liberal senator from Louisiana, Mary Landrieu, who headed up the 141-member adoption caucus. The 2 of them worked on restoring international adoptions, which in the 5 years hence have gone from 22,000 to 2,000. So if you can get people to talk about what the issues are and come to agreement on some issues, you have a better chance of at least being civil on the issues you disagree. So we had an event the other night where I invited 5 Hillary folks and 5 Trump folks, and we sat down and said, what are the things we can agree on Trump's policies on immigration? And what are the things that would have to change in policies for you Hillaryites, Hispanics, to really embrace it? So we had a very cordial invitation, and the invitation went well, and then when the food fight broke out, we decided to call it quits. No, I'm just kidding. But it was a nice time to get to know the other person's perspectives. We are the ones in this room who are going to return our country to civility. It's not going to come from the left. Saul Alinsky, control of society, is you create divisiveness. Purposely, we have the 1% against everybody else. We have the blacks against white. Black Lives Matter. We have women against men, gays against straights. All these different controversies are created for a way of controlling society. We can win if we introduce civility ourselves. The left's not going to do it. You and I have to do that. Tonight, there's a couple hundred people in this room. You all think, gee, what can I do? I live in New York, it's probably going to go Democrat, or we're in Wyoming, gosh, we're going to go Republican. Every one of us have to think about who are the people in the other states that we know from college, from the military, from where we are, and reach out to them and be able to sell them, not on why Hillary Clinton's so bad, because then they'll just bring up why Trump is so vulgar. If we can just get down to the basic issues, what are the policies, the vision that we want to represent for our country? Religious freedom. Hillary Clinton, quote, the Christians have to change their belief system. Let's get that out to some pastors. Let them see what they think about that. Number 2, Hillary Clinton says we want to protect the right to worship, not the right for religion. We have to let people know that. And we have to let people know that Donald Trump said, I think we should end the war on Christianity, quote unquote. I want to repeal the Johnson Amendment, which allows pastors to speak from the pulpit, from their heart, free speech as to who they think is best to run the country. He would never impose on the sisters of the poor to pass out abortion pills. So what is missing? And I hope some of you can help create this. There is no place that I can find. I've seen Richard Land of the Southeast the Seminary, who's put about 5 or 6 contrasts between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump on social issues, between who's using what bath. And by the way, where were all these people going to the bathroom before when this all came up? I don't understand. I mean, out in Wyoming, we cowboys been using the ladies' room for 20 years, for crying out loud. So once we get a contrast of where people stand on taxes, he wants to bring taxes down to the rest of the world for corporations. She wants to have more taxes, item by item by item, and then use your salesmanship to take that particular platform and approach your friend to their hot button. You're not going to talk about religious liberty to some guy who's a secular pro-choice person. Find out and understand where that person's coming from and how you meet their self-interest. So you can say, well, gee, I just can't get comfortable with Donald Trump. I don't like his statements. And look him straight in the eye and say, okay, in the next decade, are you going to be better off with Hillary Clinton's positions or Donald Trump's? What is in your best interest? And if we get people start to thinking about that, we win hands down. So God bless every one of you. Thank you. And this guy writing 29 books, I'm told that Washington, who's one of our least educated presidents, I'm told, had 700 volumes in his library. Thomas Jefferson, 2,100, which created the Library of Congress. Those 2,800 books, I'm told, rumor is that you either edited or wrote half of them. So thank you again for this wonderful honor. God bless you all, and ride for the brand.
We're coming to an end. You've been very patient. I very much appreciate that. Timing is actually pretty good. But let me just make a couple of comments at the very conclusion of this event. Number one, I think Foster raises an interesting and a very important point, and that is the need for unity in the country. And in our traditions, we have that. All we have to do is to remember those principles. Aristotle talked about modesty. He talked about bringing up young people who are modest. In the age of Facebook, that almost seems ridiculous. But it's important to recall. Dante, in his cantos, talked about honor. Honor. What does honor mean when, in fact, even the national security is often put in jeopardy? And of course, Plato talked about the search for truth. One crystalline word of truth is worth a world, said Plato. And so our tradition provides an understanding and a need for unity. But there's one other thing I want to get off my chest to this wonderful audience. And that's the red, white, and blue. This flag. What people in the United States who are now saying, including a backup quarterback who earns $19 million a year, that he will not stand for the Star-Spangled Banner. I'm not only talking about Colin Kaepernick, but a number of other pro football players who earn more money than I will ever see. Let me tell you about the red, white, and blue. The red stands for the blood of those Americans whose blood soaks the soil in Normandy, the Belgian forest, Incheon, Dien Bien Phu, all over this globe. That's the red. We have sacrificed in ways that most people do not and cannot possibly understand or appreciate. And let me tell you about the white. The white is the purity of our Constitution and our laws that give people the opportunity to succeed and recognize the importance of liberty. Our Constitution provides that. And let me tell you about the blue. The blue is the sadness of mothers who have to bury sons prematurely. The blue is the sadness so many of us feel about where our country has gone. We can restore all of that. I think Foster Friess represents exactly the sentiment that I think is necessary at this moment. We're a not-for-profit organization. We're not here for advocacy, but we are here for unity. We believe that it's important to unify our country under the Judeo-Christian banner and behind the traditions that stand for Western civilization. I believe in that civilization. I believe that the Western civilization is remarkable, and I'm reminded of our last honoree, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who told the story of moving to Holland after being in Saudi Arabia and being forced into a marriage with a man 40 years her senior who she had never met before. She left and went to Holland, and she's walking down a corridor, and she's with a young man. He comes to a door at the end of that corridor. He opens it, and he says to her, "Ladies first." She stands there paralyzed. She never heard that expression. In her Muslim world, ladies were always last. She starts to cry, and she looks at him and she says, "Western civilization is superior." Now that is politically incorrect, but it's also true. Western civilization is superior, and we have an obligation to defend it. Defend it with young people, defend it with those we know, defend it with our children. That is our legacy. That is what we should do. And ladies and gentlemen, I can't thank you enough for being here tonight. It's an honor to be in your presence. And let me also assure you that we at the London Center are going to do everything that we can to defend the principles on which this nation rests. And I have great colleagues to work with. Tony Schaefer and Ellie Gold and Jed Babin, who was here tonight, and Brian Griffin, and so many others who have given their time and effort so that we can defend this civilization. Thank you so much for being here. It is a great honor to be with you. Good night and travel safely.